The holographic evidence floated in the center of the council chamber, while Ambassador Kren gestured at the glowing data streams. His four arms moved in practiced patterns as he highlighted timeline after timeline of human behavior. The assembled representatives from 60 different species watched in growing confusion as the Valorian diplomat presented what he called irrefutable proof of humanity's dangerous nature. For 2 centuries we have observed this pattern, Kren announced. His voice carried the weight of someone who believed he held the moral high ground. Humans possess a psychological defect that makes them unsuitable for modern galactic society. They cannot let go of the past. The council chamber murmured with mixed reactions. Some species nodded in agreement, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Kren expanded the hologram to show a timeline stretching back 180 years. The Thuran collapse, he continued. A minor agricultural species faced ecological disaster on their homeworld. Standard galactic protocol suggested we allow natural selection to take its course. The Thuran had nothing to offer the greater community. Their world held no strategic value. Assisting them would have been an inefficient use of resources. A human mining colony on the edge of civilized space had received the distress call. They were barely surviving themselves, clinging to an asteroid field that yielded just enough minerals to justify their existence. Any rational species would have ignored the plea for help. Basic economics dictated that you don't sacrifice your own survival for strangers. The humans did it anyway. Kren pulled up records of supply ships launched from the mining colony, medical teams assembled from workers who had no medical training, agricultural specialists who were really just farmers with good intentions. 47 humans died during the rescue operations, caught in solar storms that any reasonable person would have avoided. Their ships were old, their equipment inadequate, but they kept coming back. The Thuran survived, Kren said with distaste. And humanity received gratitude. That should have been the end of it. Debts paid, obligations fulfilled. Both species move forward independently. The hologram shifted to show the next 180 years. Anonymous scholarships funding Thuran education. Mysterious investors buying up Thuran debts and forgiving them. Human. Corporations hiring Thuran workers at wages far above market rates. Construction projects. Medical supplies. Technological transfers, all of it traced back to human sources. They never announced these actions, Kren emphasized. Never sought recognition or political advantage. They simply continued, year after year, decade after decade, generation after generation. This is not normal behavior. This is obsession. A representative from the reef worlds raised a tentacle. Ambassador Kren, many species maintain long-term relationships with their allies. How is this different? Kren's expression hardened. 3 months ago, the Valorian Assembly legally acquired Thuran territory through standard debt collection procedures. The Thuran could not pay their protection fees. Galactic law clearly states that uncollected debts allow for territorial annexation. We followed every rule, filed every form, waited the required period. The chamber went silent. Within hours, Kren continued, his voice rising. Human fleets appeared at every single Valorian border, not in our space, not violating any treaty, just waiting. We counted the ships, 300 vessels, the largest fleet humanity has ever assembled. He pulled up the message that accompanied the fleet, the text displayed across every screen in the chamber. Return what you took. You have 72 hours. No negotiation, Kren said. No diplomacy, no attempt to work through proper channels, just a demand and a deadline. When we tried to open communications, they sent us this. Another message appeared, this one longer, more personal, more terrifying in its implications. 180 years ago, 47 humans died so the Thuran could live. We remember their names. Rebecca Chen, who shielded children with her own body. David Park, who flew 7 rescue missions through solar fire. Sarah Kim, who gave her rations to starving families while she slowly starved. We remember every single one. We remember what we owe, and we always pay our debts. The council chamber erupted in argument. Some species saw this as an act of war. Others recognized it as something far more dangerous, a declaration of values, a line drawn across the galaxy. Kren waited for silence before delivering his final point. Humanity has mobilized for war, not to defend their territory, not to acquire resources, not for any rational strategic objective. They are willing to fight the Valorian assembly, risk everything they have built, sacrifice their own people, all for a species that cannot help them win, cannot provide them anything of value, cannot even properly defend themselves. He turned to face the human representative, a middle-aged woman named Ruth who sat quietly in her designated seat. She had not spoken once during the entire presentation, had not objected to any of Kren's characterizations. She simply waited with the patience of someone who knew exactly how this would end. "The humans are here," Kren said, gesturing toward Ruth. "Perhaps they would like to explain their irrational behavior. Perhaps they can justify threatening galactic peace over a debt that was settled generations ago." Ruth stood slowly, her movements deliberate and calm. She walked to the center of the chamber and stood beside Kren's holographic evidence. She studied the timelines, the transaction records, the names of the 47 who died. "Ambassador Kren has presented an accurate summary," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "We did receive a distress call 180 years ago. We did respond despite the cost. 47 good people died keeping a promise to strangers. And yes, we have spent the last 2 centuries honoring their sacrifice." She turned to face the council. "You call it obsession, we call it memory. You see it as irrational. We see it as the foundation of who we are. Ambassador Kren is correct that the Thuran cannot help us win a war, cannot provide strategic advantage, cannot offer us anything except their continued existence." Ruth's expression remained calm, but her eyes held something ancient and immovable. "That is exactly why we will fight, because if we abandon them now, if we let economics and strategy override the promise made by 47 people who gave everything, then their deaths meant nothing. Then we are nothing." The chamber fell silent again. "The Valorian assembly has 72 hours, Ruth said. "After that, they will learn what it means when humans remember." She returned to her seat without another word. The council session continued, but everyone knew the real decision had already been made. Somewhere in the cold mathematics of power and principle, humanity had drawn a line, and the galaxy would have to choose which side mattered more. Ambassador Kren looked at his evidence, his perfectly logical arguments, his legal justifications, and realized with growing horror that he had made a fundamental miscalculation. He had assumed humans thought like everyone else, that they could be reasoned with, bargained with, intimidated with superior numbers. But humans never forgot a debt, and their memory was about to reshape everything. Admiral Rereath studied the tactical display while her primary arms gripped the command console. 300 human vessels surrounded every approach to Valorian space, positioned with precision that spoke of months of planning, maybe years. The red icons on her screen represented the largest human fleet ever assembled, and they had appeared in less than 12 hours. "Status of the human blockade," she demanded. Her tactical officer manipulated the hologram, zooming in on individual ships. "No change, Admiral. They maintain position at maximum weapons range. Scanning shows all systems active but no targeting locks, no aggressive posturing. They are just waiting." Waiting, that was somehow worse than threats. Rereath had commanded fleets for 30 years, fought in 4 major conflicts, understood the language of military force. Aggressive formations meant intimidation. Weapons charged meant readiness to strike. But this patient positioning at precise distances, this was something else entirely. "Communications," she ordered. "Open a channel to the human fleet." Her communications officer worked the controls, then shook his head. They acknowledge the Hail Admiral, but respond with only one word: waiting. The War Council on the Valorian homeworld had been arguing for 6 hours. Hardliners demanded immediate military action. Moderates urged negotiation. Intelligence officers presented files on human military history that made even the hardliners pause. Rereath had read those files. Humanity rarely started wars, but they had an unsettling pattern once engaged in conflict. They never stopped, not because they were particularly vicious, not because they employed overwhelming force, but because they approached war the same way they approached everything else, with absolute commitment. They finished what they started. "Admiral," her intelligence officer interrupted her thoughts, "we are receiving multiple communications from other galactic powers." Rereath brought up the message queue, her stomach tightened as she read. The Dramathi Collective, the Reef Worlds, the Silicon Communes, even. The neutral Wanderer clans, all sending the same basic message: stand down, withdraw from Thurian space, do not engage the humans. "Why?" she asked. "Why do they all care about one minor species?" Her intelligence officer pulled up financial records, trade agreements, cultural exchanges. The data painted an incredible picture. Humanity had spent 180 years building relationships with virtually every species in the galaxy, not through grand gestures or political maneuvering, but through small acts of assistance: medical supplies during a plague here, engineering expertise during a construction crisis there, agricultural aid during a famine. "They have been preparing for this," the intelligence officer said quietly. "For 2 centuries, every favor they did, every crisis they responded to, every people they helped, it was all building toward this moment." Rereath felt cold understanding settle over her. This was not a military operation. This was the execution of a plan that began before she was born. Humanity had not mobilized their fleet in response to Valorian annexation. They had been ready for decades, waiting for someone to threaten the Thurian. A priority message arrived from Thurian space. Rereath opened it expecting military intelligence. Instead, she found something far more disturbing: historical records, personal logs from the original rescue operation 180 years ago. She read about Rebecca Chen, a human engineer who had died shielding Thurian children from debris when a rescue shelter collapsed. Her last words were recorded by survivors: "Take care of them, promise me." David Park, a transport pilot who made 7 trips through a solar storm to evacuate Thurian families. His ship failed on the 8th run. The recording of his final transmission was included. "Tell my daughter this mattered. Tell her some things are worth dying for." Sarah Kim, a medic who gave her own food to starving Thurian while slowly starving herself. She survived the rescue but died 3 weeks later from malnutrition. Her journal contained a single repeated phrase: "They are somebody's children, somebody's parents, they matter." 47 names, 47 stories, 47 humans who died keeping a promise to strangers. Rereath found herself reading every single account, learning about people who had been dead for nearly 2 centuries, understanding for the first time what humanity was really protecting. Not a species, not a territory, but the meaning behind those deaths, the promise those people made. "Admiral," her sensor officer called out. "New contacts, civilian vessels entering the system." Rereath pulled up the scan, her confusion deepened. Transport ships, medical frigates, supply haulers, construction vessels, hundreds of them, all civilian, all flying human escort. "What are they doing?" she wondered aloud. Her intelligence officer found the answer in intercepted communications. "They are bringing supplies, Admiral, medical equipment, construction materials, agricultural seed stocks, enough to rebuild an entire planetary infrastructure. The humans are not preparing for war. They are preparing to rebuild the Thurian civilization from scratch if necessary." One of her junior officers spoke up, his voice uncertain. "Admiral, I do not understand. If they wanted the Thurian world, why not just take it? They clearly have the military force. Why this elaborate display?" Rereath understood, and the understanding made her feel something she had not felt in decades: shame. "Because they do not want to take," she explained. "They want to give. Everything they are doing, every ship they positioned, every supply vessel they sent. It is all designed to fulfill a promise made by people who have been dead for generations. They are not trying to conquer, they are trying to honor their dead." Another message arrived, this one addressed directly to her, marked personal and urgent. Rereath opened it with trembling hands. The message contained a list, the names and pictures of the 47 humans who died during the Thuran rescue. Below that, the names of 12,000 Thuran who survived because of them. Then the names of their children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. The list continued for pages. Over 200,000 Thuran alive today because 47 humans refused to ignore a distress call. At the bottom of the message, a single line. We do not forget, we do not forgive abandonment, withdraw or learn why. Rereath sat back in her command chair, the weight of command suddenly feeling very different. She had always viewed military decisions through the lens of tactical advantage, resource allocation, strategic positioning. The humans had just shown her a completely different calculation. How do you fight someone who does not want to win? She asked the empty air. How do you negotiate with someone who will not accept any outcome except keeping a promise? How do you defeat an enemy whose victory condition is dying with honor intact? Her communications officer looked up. Admiral, the Valorian High Command is issuing new orders. They are instructing us to prepare for full military engagement. They say we cannot back down, cannot show weakness. Rereath looked at her tactical display, at the 300 human ships that had not moved, had not threatened, had simply taken position and waited for the Valorians to choose. Behind them, the civilian vessels continued arriving, medical ships and construction crews and agricultural specialists, all ready to rebuild what war might destroy. Prepare the fleet, she ordered, her voice hollow. But understand something. We are about to fight people who spent 2 centuries keeping a promise, who mobilized their entire civilization to honor 47 deaths, who built a galaxy-spanning network of obligation just so they would never have to abandon anyone again. She pulled up the image of Rebecca Chen, the human engineer who died protecting Thuran children, studied the woman's face, read her last words again. We are about to learn, Rereath said quietly, what happens when humans remember. Lyra's hands shook as she pulled the ancient document from the archive storage. Dust particles danced in the dim light while she carefully unfolded the brittle material. The contract had been sealed in preservation polymer 180 years ago, forgotten in the chaos of reconstruction and the slow crawl toward normalcy. But it was not forgotten by everyone. The document bore signatures in human script, 47 names she recognized from the memorial in the city center, below their signatures, a simple statement that changed everything. We will stand with you until you can stand alone, no matter how long it takes, witnessed this day by all who survived, bound by blood and promise, eternal. Lyra read it 3 times, her mind struggling to process the implications. This was not just a rescue mission. This was a covenant, a binding oath that apparently had no expiration date in human culture. She heard footsteps in the archive hall, other Thuran moving through the stacks, searching for something. Anything that might explain why humans had mobilized their entire fleet over what should have been a simple territorial transaction. Lyra called her colleague Tim. Have you found anything? She held up the contract. They promised not just to save us, but to protect us forever. Tim stared at the document, his sensory stalks quivering. That makes no sense. No species maintains obligations for 2 centuries. The cost alone would be astronomical. The resources required, the commitment across generations. It is economically impossible. Unless, Lyra said slowly, unless they measure cost differently than we do. The resistance started small, a few factory workers slowing their production, administrators misplacing files, farmers hiding portions of the harvest. Within days, it spread across the entire Thuran population, not because they were organized, not because they planned it, but because they all understood the same fundamental truth. The humans had never abandoned them. Lyra watched Valorian soldiers patrol her city streets, saw them checking identification, enforcing curfews, implementing the administrative systems of occupation. They were not cruel, they followed their protocols, but they were here in Thuran space, claiming Thurian worlds, and the humans were coming to stop them. She thought about her grandmother's stories, tales passed down through 4 generations about the collapse, about solar storms and failing life support, about the moment when hope died and an entire species prepared for extinction. Then the humans arrived. Her grandmother described them as strange, speaking in languages the Thurian could not understand. But their actions needed no translation. They gave food to the hungry, medicine to the sick, shelter to the displaced. They worked until they collapsed, slept in their ships, and worked again. 47 of them never went home. The Valorian Command Center received reports of the sabotage, minor at first, then escalating, nothing violent, nothing that would justify harsh retaliation, but enough to make occupation increasingly difficult. They are inspired by the human response, a Valorian intelligence officer reported. Intercepts show they believe the humans are coming to liberate them. They see this as a rescue, just like the original collapse. Lyra attended a secret meeting in the lower archives. 200 Thurian crowded into the dusty space, all asking the same questions. What should they do? How could they help? What did the humans need from them? An elder named Krell stood before the group, his body bent. With age, his voice carrying the weight of lived history. "I was there," he said. "During the collapse, I was a child. I watched my parents starve themselves to feed me, watched our world dying, watched hope fade from every eye." He paused, gathering strength. "Then I saw a human. Her name was Rebecca. She found me in the rubble of a collapsed building. I was trapped, dying. She dug me out with her bare hands. When the building collapsed again, she covered me with her own body. I lived. She did not." The room fell silent. "For 180 years, Krell continued, "I have wondered what I owed her, what debt could possibly repay a life freely given. Now I understand. She did not want repayment. She wanted me to live, to have children, to see them grow, to pass on the story, to remember that someone cared enough to die for a stranger's child." Lyra felt tears tracking down her face. She was not alone. "The humans are coming," Krell said. "Not because they want our gratitude, not because they seek payment, but because they made a promise, and humans keep their promises. The question is, what promises will we make? Will we be worth their sacrifice?" The message spread through Thurian space like fire through dry grass. Resistance became coordination. Coordination became purpose. The Thurian could not fight the Valorians, but they could make occupation impossible. They could demonstrate that they chose their protectors. They chose the species that remembered. Lyra returned to the archives. She began copying every document from the original rescue, every log entry, every recorded conversation, every scrap of evidence showing what humanity had done, what they had given, what they had lost. She broadcast it all across the planetary network, made sure every Thurian could see, could read, could understand exactly what price humanity paid 180 years ago. The response was overwhelming. Memorials appeared overnight. Gatherings formed around the statue of Rebecca Chen in the central square. Thurian children learned the names of all 47 humans who died, learned their stories, learned that strangers could become family. A Valorian patrol stopped Lyra outside her apartment. The officer looked at the data chip she carried. "What is this?" "History," she answered. "The story of 47 humans who died saving my species. The story of why humans do not forget. The story of why they are coming." The officer let her go, but Lyra saw something in his eyes, uncertainty, maybe even doubt. He was a soldier following orders. She was part of a population following their hearts. The human fleet remained at the Valorian borders, still waiting, still positioned with mathematical precision. But now everyone understood what they were waiting for. They were waiting to see if the galaxy had learned anything in 180 years. If species could understand that some debts transcended economics, if promises could survive generations, if anyone else remembered how to value life over profit. Ambassador Rereath stood before the Galactic Council again, this time without invitation. She carried a single item, a worn journal that belonged to David Park. the pilot who died on his 8th rescue run. She read his final entry to the assembled species. They asked me why I keep flying into the storm, why I risk everything for people I do not know. I told them about my daughter. She is 3 years old. I want her to grow up in a galaxy where people help each other, where distress calls get answered, where promises matter. If I die today, I die making that galaxy real. Ruth closed the journal. He did die that day, keeping his promise, making a better galaxy real, and we, his descendants, will honor that. The Valorians have 48 hours remaining. After that, every species will learn what happens when you threaten what humans died to protect. She left the journal on the council podium, a silent testimony to human values, a reminder that some species measured wealth in lives saved rather than territories claimed. And somewhere on the Thuran homeworld, Lyra held her grandmother's hand while they watched the sky, waiting for the humans to arrive, waiting for the promise to be kept, waiting for the galaxy to remember that debts of blood demanded payment in protection. The silence before battle felt different than Admiral Rereath expected. Her weapons officer confirmed firing solutions. Her tactical screens showed perfect positioning. One command would send 500 Valorian ships against 300 human vessels. The mathematics suggested a clear victory. Except mathematics did not account for what she saw through her view screen. A small shuttle launched from the human fleet, broadcasting diplomatic clearance codes and a direct message for Admiral Rereath. The voice was Ambassador Ruth, calm and steady. "Admiral, before this begins, I would like to invite you and 2 advisors to visit the Thuran homeworld, under flag of truce, guaranteed safe passage, see what we are really protecting." Rereath's command staff erupted in protests. It was obviously a trap, a delay tactic, a psychological trick to undermine their resolve, but Rereath studied the tactical display and realized something crucial. The humans did not need tricks. They were already positioned for maximum impact, already had their allies in place, already controlled the narrative. "Prepare my shuttle," she ordered. "I will see what they want me to see." The Thuran homeworld looked different than intelligence reports suggested. Rereath expected military fortifications, weapon emplacements, the machinery of war. Instead, she saw construction equipment, medical facilities, agricultural centers, humans working alongside Thuran in what appeared to be massive rebuilding projects. Ambassador Rereath met her at the landing pad. The human woman looked tired, but her eyes held something Rereath had rarely seen: absolute certainty in the righteousness of her cause. "Thank you for coming, Admiral," Rereath said. "I know this appears unusual, but understanding requires seeing. Follow me." They walked through newly constructed streets, past schools where human teachers worked with Thuran students, past hospitals where human doctors trained Thuran physicians, past farms where human agronomists introduced crop strains designed specifically for Thuran biology. "This has been happening for 180 years, Rereath explained. Anonymous funding, quiet assistance, humans working in secret to make sure the Thuran could eventually stand alone. We never sought recognition, never demanded gratitude. We simply kept the promise made by those who died." Rereath's military advisor whispered, "This is propaganda, designed to make us emotional, to cloud tactical judgment." But Rereath could not look away from a classroom where a human teacher showed Thuran children how to solve complex mathematical problems. The children laughed when they got answers wrong. The teacher encouraged them patiently. This was not propaganda. This was genuine care spanning generations. Rereath led them to a memorial in the city center. 47 names carved in stone, each with a small holographic display showing the person's face, their story, their final words. An elderly Thuran approached, using a walking stick for support, his sensory stalks focused on Rereath. With uncomfortable intensity, "I am Krell," he said. "I survived the collapse. I was 8 years old when Rebecca Chen died protecting me from falling debris. Do you know what she said? She told me to live, to have a family, to be happy. Those were her last words: live and be happy." Krell gestured to the crowd gathering around the memorial. "I have 5 children, 14 grandchildren, 23 great-grandchildren, all alive because a human stranger decided I mattered. All of them taught the story, all of them understanding what humanity gave us. He turned back to Rereath. If your child was drowning and a stranger died saving them, would you honor that sacrifice? Would you protect that stranger's family if they needed help? Would you remember? Or would you calculate the economic value of obligation and decide it costs too much? Rereath felt the question like a physical blow. Her species measured everything in terms of resources and strategic advantage. The idea of multi-generational debt based purely on moral obligation seemed alien, impractical, even dangerous. It is inefficient, she said, more to herself than to Krell. Spending resources across generations on a species that cannot provide equivalent return, it weakens your own civilization. Ruth stepped forward. Admiral, let me show you something else. They walked to what appeared to be a financial office. Inside, a human woman reviewed trade agreements with Thuran representatives. Ruth made introductions. This is Bate. Her grandmother Amy was born on the mining colony that sent the original rescue mission. Amy's father was David Park, the pilot who died on his 8th rescue run. Bate looked up from her work, smiled politely. Admiral, my great-grandfather died before my grandmother was born, but she was raised on his story. She dedicated her entire life to helping the Thuran. I grew up watching her work, understanding that some promises pass through generations. I have 2 children, they know the story, they will continue the work. Why, Rereath asked, genuinely confused. Your great-grandfather is gone, the debt was his, why do you carry it? Bates' smile faded, replaced by something harder, more fundamental. Because it is not about debt, it is about identity. My great-grandfather believed in a galaxy where people help each other, where promises matter, where life has value beyond economic calculation. If I abandon that belief, if I decide his sacrifice was too expensive to honor, then I am saying his life meant nothing, his choice meant nothing, humanity means nothing. Ruth pulled up holographic displays showing human resource allocation over 180 years. The numbers were staggering, trillions of credits, enough to build colonies, develop technologies, expand territory, all of it redirected to supporting Thuran independence. You are correct, Admiral, Ruth admitted. This cost us enormously. We are probably poorer as a species because of our choice. We could have built an empire with these resources, could have conquered, could have dominated. She closed the displays. But we sleep well at night. We know who we are. We know what we stand for. Can you say the same? Does the Valorian Assembly rest easy knowing they followed the rules, filed the paperwork, legally claimed territory from a species that cannot defend itself? The question hung in the air. Rereath's tactical advisor pulled her aside, spoke urgently. Admiral, this is psychological warfare. They are trying to make us doubt ourselves, question our mission. We must return to the fleet, execute our orders. But Rereath watched Thuran children playing in the street, saw them laughing with human kids who probably came here with their parents, saw a society not preparing for war but building for peace. They are not preparing to fight us, she realized. They are preparing to rebuild everything we might destroy. They are planning for victory that has nothing to do with military conquest. Ruth approached, handed Rereath a data chip. This contains the names and stories of every person the original 47 saved, plus all their descendants. Over 200,000 Thuran alive today because humans kept a promise. The Valorian High Command can have it. Maybe numbers will mean something to them if morality does not. Rereath returned to her shuttle in silence, her mind churning with impossible questions. How do you fight someone who already won by being willing to sacrifice everything? How do you negotiate with someone whose victory condition is dying with integrity intact? How do you defeat an enemy who made themselves undefeatable by simply keeping a promise? As her shuttle lifted off, she saw Ambassador Ruth standing at the landing pad, not watching the departure but turning back toward the city, back toward the work of rebuilding, back toward a promise 180 years old and still. Bindings. Rereath understood finally, terribly, the trap humanity laid, They did not need to win the battle. They already won something more important. They won their identity. They won the moral authority that came from absolute commitment. They won the galaxy's respect by showing that some species still valued honor over advantage. And the Valorian Assembly was about to learn what happens when you threaten what humans died to protect. The Valorian High Command received Admiral Rereath's report in complete silence. She stood before the council chamber while her words hung in the air like accusations, not against the humans, but against her own people, against the cold calculations that valued territory over truth. They have already won, she concluded. Not through military force, but through moral authority. Every species in the galaxy is watching, asking themselves who they would rather be, the ones who keep promises or the ones who exploit legal loopholes. The hardliners erupted in fury, calling her a defeatist, a coward, claiming she had been psychologically compromised by human manipulation. They demanded immediate military action, demanded she be removed from command. But before the council could vote, alarms sounded across the chamber. Multiple fleet signatures entering the system, an officer reported, his voice shaking. Dramathi, Reef Worlds, Silicon Communes, Wanderer clans, counting over 5,000 vessels and still arriving. The tactical display filled with icons, species from across the galaxy converging on Valorian space, not to attack but to witness, to bear testimony to what happened when you threatened what humans protected. Ambassador Kren, who started this entire crisis with his presentation about human psychology, rose from his seat, his forearms trembling. They made us the villain in a galactic story. They spent 180 years building relationships, earning trust, demonstrating their values, all so that when this moment came, when someone finally threatened their promise, the entire galaxy would side with them. The Galactic Council convened in emergency session. Species after species voted to grant the Thuran protected status under galactic law, designated humanity as official guarantors, stripped the Valorian Assembly of their territorial claim. The vote was not even close. On the Thuran homeworld, Lyra stood with her grandmother in the central square, watching the sky fill with ships, human vessels joined by hundreds of others, all bearing the colors of species humanity had helped over the centuries. They came, her grandmother whispered, tears streaming down her aged face. Just like the first time when no one else would, the humans came and they brought everyone they ever helped with them. Bate, the great-granddaughter of David Park, received a message from the human fleet commander. The Valorian withdrawal had been confirmed. Thuran space was free. The promise was kept. She sat at her desk in the financial office and cried, not from sadness but from the overwhelming weight of completion. 4 generations of her family had carried this obligation. Her great-grandfather died for it. Her grandmother dedicated her life to it. Her mother continued it. And now, finally, it was fulfilled. Not that the work was done. The Thuran still needed support, still required assistance to truly stand alone. But the crisis was past. The promise was honored. The debt was paid and protection freely given. Admiral Rereath watched her fleet stand down, saw Valorian vessels begin withdrawal from Thuran territory, felt the shame of defeat mixed with strange relief. They did not destroy us, she said to her tactical officer. They could have, with all those allied ships, they could have turned this into a massacre, but they did not even fire a shot. They just waited until we understood. Her officer nodded. What did we understand, Admiral? Rereath pulled up the data chip Ruth had given her, displayed the names of 200,000 Thuran who lived because 47 humans died. That power is not just about weapons and territory. Sometimes the strongest force in the galaxy is simply keeping your word, being willing to sacrifice everything for a promise, making people want to be like you rather than fear you. The Valorian Assembly issued a formal apology, paid reparations to the Thuran, requested diplomatic talks with humanity. They did not do this out of kindness but out of necessity. The galaxy had turned against them, trade agreements were suspended, defense pacts questioned, alliances strained. all because they threatened what humans died to protect. Ruth stood before the Galactic Council one final time, accepting their decision, acknowledging the new protected status for the Thuran. She looked tired, older than her years, carrying the weight of 180 years of obligation. "Thank you," she said simply. "The 47 who died can rest now. Their sacrifice was honored, their promise kept, their memory preserved. Humanity asks nothing else." But the Galactic Council had learned something. They created the Office of Mutual Obligation, dedicated to tracking interspecies debts, not for payment but for remembrance, not to enforce contracts but to preserve promises. They asked humanity to lead it. Ruth accepted, but made them record the first debt in the system, humanity's obligation to the Thuran, for teaching them that some promises are worth everything. On the Thuran homeworld, they built a new monument, larger than the memorial in the city center. It showed two figures, one human, one Thuran, hands clasped. The inscription read, "In our darkest hour strangers became family. In our liberation family became legend. We will never forget." Krell stood before the monument, his great-grandchildren around him, telling them the story he had told countless times, about Rebecca Chen who died protecting him, about David Park who flew into storms, about all 47 humans who proved that some species measure wealth in lives saved. "Will the humans always protect us?" one child asked. Krell smiled. "They made a promise, and humans never forget, but more importantly, we made a promise back, to be worthy of their sacrifice, to help others the way they helped us, to remember that debts are not burdens but bonds, and some bonds last forever." Across the galaxy, the story spread, became legend. The species that spent 180 years keeping a promise. That mobilized their entire civilization to honor their dead. That changed the fundamental nature of galactic politics through simple, stubborn commitment to doing what they said they would do. Other species began examining their own practices, asking themselves what promises they had broken, what obligations they had ignored, what debts they had calculated away as economically inefficient. The Dramathi Collective announced new aid programs for struggling colonies. The Reef Worlds established rapid response teams for disasters. The Silicon Communes began teaching advanced technology to developing species, all citing humanity's example. Ruth received a message months later from a young Valorian officer who served under Rereath, asking if humans would help establish similar programs in Valorian space. "We want to learn how to remember the way you do." The message read, "We want to be the species that keeps promises instead of the one that breaks them." Bate answered on behalf of the Human Council, "Of course, that is what family does." And so humanity's gift spread, not through conquest or intimidation, not through superior technology or military might, but through simple demonstration that keeping your word, honoring your dead, protecting those you promised to protect, these things mattered more than economic advantage. The galaxy would never be the same. Somewhere in human space, in a museum dedicated to the Thuran rescue, they kept David Park's journal, Rebecca Chen's last transmission, Sarah Kim's personal effects, artifacts from 47 people who died keeping a promise to strangers. Every human child learned their names, learned their stories, learned that humanity measured greatness not in territories claimed but in promises kept. And on clear nights, when the stars shone bright, Thuran children looked up at the sky and knew, somewhere up there, humans were watching, waiting, ready to keep their promise. Because humans never forgot a debt. And their payback was unbelievable.